The way we think about it primarily is as a toy. And the closest analog that I know of is Lego, right? Lego, like, there's no winners or losers. You can be creative, you can follow, a script, but you don't have to. But I think that we're at this interesting time now in the world where we've, as society, almost overdosed on these feeds of videos and photos. And so I think there's this like pent up desire for creative expression that isn't photo based. And so whether it's 3D or not, I think people want something like that. And I think Rooms fills that need for some people. Even though it sounds outrageous to say, I think Rooms could be as big as Roblox someday and bigger.
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show that gives a stage to the founders and creatives pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Jason Toth. Jason was a product manager director at Meta, general manager at Vine. At Google, he worked on YouTube and Gmail, and all this experience in big tech companies taught him lessons on what to keep and what to get rid of when building products people love.
I think that second bucket might be a larger bucket. Big tech companies are victims of their own success. Google and Facebook, they have much more to lose than to gain at this point, and they act accordingly.
He is now the founder and CEO of Things Inc., the company behind the award-winning app Rooms, a platform that has successfully replaced Doomscrolling with Roomscrolling and unlocked a new way to create in 3D and tell stories, all wrapped in an app recognized as best Apple design. In this conversation, we will dive into how they have built such an addictive app and why people spend an incredible amount of time just creating.
But one of the things we see people do that was a complete shocker for us is they spend many hours creating their rooms. Why did that person spend 20 hours on that room? I'd say there's two main reasons.
What he has learned from building some of the most popular creative VR tools.
Years ago, I worked on blocks at Google and also spent some time working on Tilt Brush, and both of them were amazing creative tools. But when we looked at the numbers, most people with VR headsets wanted to.
We look at the many ways Rooms is already implementing AI, what is coming on the short term, and a bold vision for the future.
I think Rooms is like the perfect environment for AI to thrive. So you can say, hey, this character is Sir Isaac Newton, and he should respond as such. So then anyone who visits the room can tap that character and actually have a conversation with an AI that's representing him. We do have some things coming up in the pipe that use AI that I'm particularly excited about. Longer term, though, I think there's a lot of interesting potential in terms of assisting people in creating rooms. For instance,
and finally, we end up with a heartfelt advice to founders building amazing products.
The advice to founders is not just to follow your heart, but to follow your gut. Do things that don't even necessarily make sense on paper, but that feel right.
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshi, who made this episode possible. Meshi is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high-quality, stylized 3D models in just a minute. There are two features that completely blew my mind. One is the ability to create stylized texture for any mesh, with or without UV. And the other is the ability to edit portions of AI-generated textures like in Midjourney in Painting. The team has been pushing continuous updates, improving significantly the geometry and texture quality, and I strongly encourage you to visit meshi.ai and check out the generous free plan. After that, make sure to use the code XRAI20 to get a 20% discount on your subscription. And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Jason under the spotlight. So Jason, it is a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So Jason, let's start from the very beginning, right? What is Room? Is it a social platform? Is it a creation tool?
Sure. So Rooms is a platform that lets you create, browse, and explore 3D interactive rooms. And it has elements of a social media platform. There's a feed that you could browse through. It has elements of a game. A lot of our users call it a game, even though we don't think of it so much as that. The way we think about it primarily is as a toy. And the closest analog that I know of is Lego, right? Lego, like, there's no winners or losers. You can be creative, you can follow, a script, but you don't have to. But at the end of the day, it's a toy more than anything else, and that's what we're after. We want to create a creative toy for people to play with.
There is also another interesting perspective here, because a toy, a bit for who, right? Because when you think at Lego, it could be the toy for someone that builds it, but it can be the toy for someone that experiences it, right?
True. Although I think similar to Lego, most people don't just want to look at a Lego creation; they want to actually create. And I think where we are with rooms today is similar, where most people who are really into rooms are creating things. In terms of audience, we sort of design for the kids within all of us. Our team it's a small team, and we're sort of building for ourselves and our former selves and what we wish we had when we were kids. Practically speaking, most of our users are teenagers, and they skew female more than male, about 2 to 1. But we have users of all ages, as young as my 4-year-old daughter and as old as an active 75-year-old user who we were recently speaking with.
We're going to dive maybe a little bit more into this kind of like, not necessarily demographics, but who are these people and why they're doing it. But I think it's important to notice one thing, is that rooms, if you say it like this, is being room, like creating interactive 3D rooms, right? I think it doesn't do justice to the kind of like feeling that rooms creates when experiencing those, because it is extremely stylized, right? It is this voxel look, the humor in a way that is presented from the very beginning. So why don't you maybe guide us a little bit about that, and what were the choices that went into creating something this way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, part of the motivation for creating rooms in the first place was an acknowledgement that 3D creation is really hard. I spent many years working on 3D and in VR, and despite that, about 4 years ago, when I left my job at Meta and I was exploring what to do next, I had a really hard time even figuring out how to use, the standard 3D creation software out there. Software like Blender and Cinema 4D. They're super powerful and incredible pieces of software, but they're really complicated. And so, as we thought about how can we make 3D creation easy, we explored a lot of options. Ultimately, Voxels turned out to be an approach that made it much easier to create, both because of the nature of voxels, that anyone can add a voxel or remove a voxel, and it's not like some 3D applications where you do a destructive edit that you can't undo. You don't have that problem with voxels. But the other advantage, of course, with voxels is that there are hundreds of millions of people who have played with them in Minecraft and other apps, and so that decision came pretty early, and I'm really happy with it to have this voxel-like approach. Of course, as you alluded to, it also gives the app a certain aesthetic that I think overall our users appreciate. It's described by some as retro, although most of our users weren't alive when that aesthetic maybe was established. But yeah, there was basically a series of decisions, starting with voxel or otherwise, that we've made to try to keep things simple enough that anyone can build, but also maintaining a ceiling that's high enough that people don't get bored easily.
Yeah, and it's not just about look, Every time when I look at this creative tool, it's like, what is that sweet spot between easy to create but still pleasing? And maybe I'm curious, what are some of the things that you threw away in the process, right? You ended up settling on voxels, but what were the other things that you consider maybe along this journey?
Initially we had a handful of constraints that I felt very sure about. For instance, rooms had to have walls because rooms have walls, and things needed to be at a fixed scale. So if I added something from the Thing library, that's like our library of free 3D assets, it was important that it always be the correct size relative to everything else in the library. That's another thing, by the way, that came out of playing with with 3D software prior to Rooms and trying to download things and download 3D models and noticing that they were at different levels of complexity and scale and so on. Anyway, so we had a number of constraints like that, room walls, fixed scale, etc. We've actually eliminated a lot of those constraints over time. Early on, we found that users were hacking their way around the wall requirement. So we had in code that you had to have a wall, but we also at some point made a 404 page in Rooms, and for that page we didn't want walls, so we overrid it on our side. But users found out because they could remix any room on their platform that they could also remix the 404 room, and suddenly the 404 room was like the most remixed room, and everybody was using it to get around the wall constraint. So we relaxed that constraint. Similarly with scale, we found people really wanted to increase the size of things, and ultimately we listened to them and adjusted and enabled scale. Most recently, we have adjusted the room thumbnails that appear on like your profile, and as it's loading, they were hexagonal from the start because that was the shape of a room. But nowadays, most rooms, or at least most popular rooms, are not hexagonal. People are just building outside of the space of the room. So we've been constantly adapting, trying to listen to users, keep with our initial intention, but ultimately do what our users are showing us and telling us with their actions.
So you mentioned a few things, right? In a sense that it all starts with an empty room, right? Then you get a bunch of things, yep, right? And in this case are furniture pieces or other objects, or maybe characters, right? It could be. And those can be added to the room, or you can even create your own. So there is a simple voxel editor that you can add cubes on top of each other, create these simple shapes, whatever you want. It could be a painting and so on. And then you have that room that per se it is a static scene or little diorama, right?
Yep.
But then what next? Like, what happened next? Can you make that alive? Can you make that interactive? And if so, how?
Totally. So one of the very first decisions we made when developing Rooms was that we wanted to enable interactivity of anything in the room. And we didn't want to just program that, a thing could do X and Y and we'd have, a drop down for this and a drop down for that. And so when we thought about how to achieve that, we ultimately concluded that we needed to allow users to code. And so for anything in a room, anything in the library, there is associated code. We also decided that only things would have code and that there would not be like room level code. And the main reason for that is so that you could upload things to the thing library, download them, and everything should just work. And nothing should be reliant on something in the room that's independent of things. So that's how we started. And all the functionality that we wanted to add to Rooms, we did so in a way that users could then code it up themselves. Over time, we launched on new platforms. So initially we were on desktop web, and then we launched on iPhone and iPad. And more users we found were finding us on iOS, on their phones mostly. And it turns out that coding on your phone is a pretty miserable experience, especially when you want to like preview the room and view your code, and there's just too many things on the screen. And so people did not code so much. Ultimately, we, as of a few months ago, we added, we call an actions editor, which basically gives you easy visual access to most of the functionality that we've enabled in code. And it works alongside code, so you can still code. So in terms of what you can actually do, well, you can make it so that when you tap a thing, it says something. You can make it so that when a room starts, when it first opens, something moves. You can integrate some basic AI functionality. So you can say, hey, this character is Sir Isaac Newton, and he should respond as such. And so then anyone who visits the room can tap that character and actually have a conversation with an AI that's representing him. There are literally 100 plus functions that we've enabled. So it's hard to enumerate all of them, but people
No,
can.
no, but
Yeah.
but so from my understanding, right? Let's imagine there is a lamp. The lamp come with the ability to be switched on and off,
Yeah.
right? Then let's say if I want to change the color of the light of that lamp, right? That's something that I can code within the thing, right? So the code that is inside the thing. And if I want something, for example, let's say I want a drawer of a cabinet to open up, that might also be preset inside that,
Exactly.
right? And if I want an object to be inside that drawer when it opens, like, I mean, how? Because I'm trying to think, right? People are very creative, and when the moment that you give them power, they want to do it.
Yeah.
And how do they do it? And especially who does it? Because that's a bit the follow-up question, right? When you mention like we have like younger audience, are they the one coding? But maybe we can start with the first question.
Yeah. Start with how. It's a great question. The question in general of like, how do you allow people to add interactivity in a way that is simple but powerful is a deceivingly complex challenge, right?
$1 million question. I think that there are so many people trying to figure this out because it's so important. And please go ahead.
Totally. And typically, as you add more power, you add complexity. One of the things we did early on that luckily, knock on wood, has stuck around is we created 3 special types of voxels. So in our voxel editor, our block editor, there's a palette of colors, but then there are 3 like magic colors, and they're not really colors, but we found that this was like a simple metaphor for people to understand. One of them is light source. So you can say, I'm going to place this special colored block here, and that's where I want light to emit from my thing. And then elsewhere, you can adjust the parameters. The second one is media. So you can say, maybe you made a 3D model of a TV and you want to put a picture on the TV. So you can do that. If you put media voxels there, then we detect that there are media voxels, and then in the interface, you can upload an image or via code. You could specify an image. And then finally, there's text, similar to images, but it's a text block. So that's one approach that we took. There's another example of like how people will do these things is we offer animation frames. So if you make a voxel model of a character, maybe you want him or her to blink. And so you could create frames where they're partially blinking and then fully blinking, and then you could specify the animation to loop, or in this case, you'd want it to like bounce, right? I want to close and then open and pause. So we just kind of like worked through these things as we wanted them ourselves and tried to build them in ways that I could explain to my 6-year-old son and he would understand. And that was sort of like the test, right? Like, can someone with absolutely no 3D experience kind of figure this out on their own?
Even though I doubt that sometimes a 6-year-old will be extremely smart when they want something. This is the other extreme, that I think even more determined than a 14, 15 years old to some extent.
You're so right. There's an interesting thing where Rooms is an app, I'd say broadly speaking, for kids or young people. And therefore some people assume that, it might not be as sophisticated, but to your point, teenagers and can often, especially like nowadays with YouTube, learn very advanced software if they're motivated. And so, to your question about like who are making these rooms, it is really teenagers predominantly. People voluntarily share their age in surveys. We don't collect that information, so we don't have like full details on it. But one of the things we see people do that was a complete shocker for us is they spend many, many, many hours creating their rooms. And they do so, this was also a surprise to us, they do so primarily on mobile, primarily on their phones and on their iPads. For me, I can't imagine creating anything for more than an hour. Even that seems like a lot on my phone. But we can see that people are spending many hours, and they tell us. And our conclusion after talking to users is that they're doing it largely for the process of doing it. Again, similar to Lego, the joy isn't no one buys a finished Lego creation just to display, right? The joy is the creation itself. And people tell us the words they use are like cozy and relaxing and feeling like they're in the zone. And so anyway, so that's who's using it and how they're using it. Again, a surprise that it's mostly on mobile.
But this is such an important thing in a sense that we live in this, let's say, creator economy, right? Where these apps and these tools want to make you a creator. Well, one of the hardest thing is to make people creative, right? So to make them to create stuff and share it, right? Now, so is the incentives that these creators have just the process of creating? I mean, do they do it for the likes? I mean, there is no monetization for the creator side, right? So they just why they are doing it?
Yeah, why
it's
are they
just
doing
the process.
So it's a good question that sometimes we ask ourselves as a team. We're like, why did that person spend 20 hours on that room? I don't know, but I'm grateful they did. I'd say there's two main reasons. One is just the process itself is feel good for them. A lot of people write into us saying, I used your app to get my mind off of something bad happening in my life, and it really allowed me to escape that in a positive, healthy way. But then the other reason is we do have metrics. We have likes and views, and certainly there are some users who care more about that. I expected that more people would create a room and take a video of it and share it on other social networks. We actually don't see that as much as I expected. It does seem like people are more motivated by the intrinsic like joy of creation than other things. Again, it's like not what I expected, having worked at YouTube and Vine, where it very much felt like people wanted views, and that was really a precursor to eventual monetization for them. So it does feel like a different thing. But I think that we're at this interesting time now in the world where we've as society almost overdosed on these feeds of videos and photos. And so I think there's this like pent up desire for creative expression that isn't photo based. And so whether it's 3D or not, I think people want something like that. And I think Rooms fills that need for some people.
So we have discussed about the creation part, right? There is something that happens in different ways, right? The creation of the assets, the voxel, the positioning inside the environment, room, and even broader, right? It becomes more of a diorama, like a street at some point. I've seen that people are creating all sorts of things. And so have you considered, given also your background and as far as I understood, your love for the medium, like also allowing you to create in VR?
Yes, I would love that.
And where is it?
Yeah,
where is it?
Well, so part of the thesis for our company is that 3D creation is important because our digital futures will eventually become more three-dimensional. Like if you think about the first screens that we all, or that humans experienced, they were small and they were black and white, and over time they got bigger and higher resolution and color, and basically they're becoming more and more realistic. But now we're at the point where we can barely even detect the differences in like number of pixels. And so it feels like in our lifetimes, our digital interfaces must become more 3D. How that manifests is very much an open question, but in any scenario, whether it's glasses or holographic displays, 3D content we believe will just become more and more prevalent. So lost my train of thought.
Why not? Why not?
VR.
Could you create in
Yes.
VR? Because I mean, when you're thinking about creating on a tablet, I mean, and you know how it is to create in VR, right? A voxel creator, it's like the best in the zone thing.
100%. Yes. So we would absolutely love to build in VR and or to allow people to build in VR. When Apple announced that they were releasing a headset, we immediately scheduled a meetup for the day it was coming out. and said, we this is the time. If any company is going to bring VR, AR to the masses, this was our thought at the time, and we thought, it's going to be Apple. And so we got together, got the device, and what we found, at least initially, and I'm sure they've made tons of improvements, but was that there were some constraints that made it difficult, if not impossible, for us to port what we had with Rooms right now to AR VR. The biggest reason, frankly, was that we have code that can execute on runtime, and that combined with 6DoF, whatever, it just it doesn't work. So what we ended up doing was saying, what can we build with the assets we have to sort of experiment with this new platform? And that's why we created this app, a bunch of things, because we realized we have this library of 3D models that all look kind of consistent, and it was just fun to place them around your room. So we started there.
But, I kind of disagree a bit in the sense that, the Vision Pro, I don't think it is that kind of tool that allow you to easily create. It is, personally, the hand inputs, they have this promise that everything is easy, but when you're using your eyes as a pointer, man, I have this extra stress every time I want to close something, because do you want to close? Yes or no? Yes or no? Don't look at the no. Don't look at the no. And I do also, given specifically the kind of audience towards this is kind of like targeted, being teens, then, a headset like the Quest, it's kind of like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So is that really an Apple thing, or is that a VR? And by the way, it's totally fine that there isn't a VR editor. That is not the point. But it's more like, why not a Quest instead of something that is a $3,500 or $4,000 device?
I think the biggest reason, candidly, is just the potential audiences. Our team has 2 engineers, and we maintain an app for iPhone and iPad and desktop web. We could build a client for Quest or otherwise, but the size of the audience is just not there. We saw this years ago. I worked on blocks at Google, and also spent some time working on Tilt Brush, and both of them were amazing creative tools. Obviously, the industry has evolved some since then. But when we looked at the numbers, most people with VR headsets wanted to play games. They didn't want to build. And so when you take the size of the market times the size of the percent of people who want to do this sort of app, it's small. I'd love to get there eventually. I don't know.
But this is the answer. This is 100% agree. This is what I agree with you. It's about focus and it's about prioritization. And I think that it's tough. And I do genuinely believe that there is space for a creative market using VR. But for some reason, even Tilt Brush, right? Yeah. Now, Google Blocks is on Quest. Yeah. And I was expecting to see a resurrection, seeing things moving again. Nothing is happening. Yeah. I haven't seen people posting it. And I'm so sad. I'm really sad.
I'm sad too. I don't know though. Our team all has Quests. We all have Vision Pros. The tech has come so far, as you know, and yet we don't put them on that much. And I think that is due to a number of reasons, but until that changes, it's hard for companies, certainly of our size, to justify investment. On the controller versus hand input, just because I think it's interesting, I personally so much prefer a controller because of the preciseness that you described. And yet I'm also so happy that Apple didn't have controllers. And I'm so hopeful that we can get to a point where I can just use my hands. So it's just one less thing I need to worry about. And I think we will get there. So that's part of what gets me super excited, especially when you think about Rooms, where the main mechanic is just taking a thing and plopping it. And that all you need is hands for that, right? You can actually do that with just your hands. There's still a lot of other technical constraints, but it makes me excited about the eventual potential.
No, absolutely. And that's what a bunch of things does pretty well, right? You have this island, you put stuff in it, you kind of like glue it together, and then you can move the island around. So that totally work. My statement was more towards an actual creation exercise, right?
Yeah.
When you need to change color of something, make a line, make a plane, stretch things. That's the moment that controller, I think, are just superior.
Yeah.
But
Although, just because I think it's interesting, especially given your perspective, I think one of the most brilliant things Tiltbrush did in their interface, which was copied by so many, is just to have like this palette on your one hand, as opposed to mapping every button on the controller to a different action and have we joked, Bruno and my team joked as we were building the Vision Pro app that like half of VR apps, it feels like half of VR apps, the first 15 minutes is just learning how to use that specific VR app, right? Like, and learning. And so I think with that sort of design, maybe you don't need as many buttons. But anyway, it's an interesting debate. I think there'll always be a place for controllers, but I like to push on like how much can you do just with like point and click.
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that if you're enjoying this conversation, you should definitely check out the XR AI Spotlight newsletter. By subscribing, you will get weekly interviews like this one directly in your inbox, an app or product I personally have tested and recommend, and access to a list of over 400 mixed reality apps for Quest that you can easily search and filter. Just check the first link in the show description. And now, let's get back to the show. It's a good point. It's a good point. Look, there is one thing I also want to ask you, because, and going back to rooms a bit, and then there are two other topics I want to discuss, a bit of your background and how that influenced this. Also you mentioned about AI, that's another interesting point. But when you think about what people are making in rooms, right? What are some of the things that are creating? Because I honestly went down, and then I found the room was interesting. It was kind of like a little treasure hunt. It's like, okay, open this and click this. And I ended up spending there probably good 10, 12 minutes at least. And I was like, okay. And then I ended up, there was a ghost at the end. I started talking with the ghost. And I was like, I don't know, it just felt like a very unique experience in a way, something you don't get on a social media. And I can see how that's been stretched because I've just scraped the tip of the iceberg, let's say, right? So what are people building in rooms?
Yeah, it is a wide variety. It's almost, in some ways it's like asking like, what websites are people making? You can make literally anything. We expected more games, people to make more games, like kind of like the one you described. We thought escape rooms would be perfect. It's called Rooms. Like, we actually don't see that many people making escape rooms. What seems much more common is that like diorama you described, where it's a little scene, and I think in some sense it is a story that they're trying to tell. Maybe not like a traditional story with like a story arc, but they're trying to communicate something. Sometimes you see people making rooms dedicated to people, family members or famous people. Sometimes you see people doing fan art. There's a number of beautiful like rooms that recreate scenes in famous movies. One trend that has been very large recently is people creating rooms for OCs, original characters. Apparently, there's like a large number of people who dream up a character and maybe sketch it or otherwise, and now they can actually create a room for their character to exist in. So there's all sorts of stuff on the platform, and it continues to evolve, and we're continuing to add new tools to help it evolve over time.
You mentioned new tools, right? And AI being a tool in a way, right? Being like something that is put to the made available to the creators to have a conversation with a character, for example. So, what are the ways that AI is being implemented in rooms?
So most of our AI integrations currently are behind the scenes, like users aren't even aware of them, and it's mostly used for things like content moderation, right? We're available in like 16 languages, and people are very inventive in how they write inappropriate things in comments, and it turns out AI is exceptionally good at identifying that. So that's mostly where we integrate AI today. We have the AI characters that we talked about. We had AI image generation for some time. We ended up removing it. To our surprise, our users, rather than be excited about the option to generate AI images from within rooms, they were actually pretty upset about it. And it was costing us a lot of money. So we pulled that back.
Win-win.
Yeah, right. But we do have some things coming up in the pipe that use AI that I'm particularly excited about. Two, namely, one is the ability to give character voices. So you can now synthesize voices really effectively, and in rooms today, you can tell characters to say things, but it's just a speech bubble. Well, soon you'll be able to actually give that character a voice, and playing around with this, it's actually like the most fun I've had in rooms yet. Just being able to like type something, have a virtual character where the voice is coming from. It's really cool, and it really just like makes the consumption of rooms more interesting. The other area we're using AI is to generate background music. So there's a lot of recent developments in AI music generation. And while, I don't know anyone that's listening to that, on the radio in their car yet, I think there's an existing, like a current use case that, for rooms, which is I want background music for my room. I want to give it a certain feel. I don't need words. I don't need it to be from a famous musician. I just want to give it the feeling. And actually taking it a step further, we've experimented with just taking a picture of a room and then asking AI to write a prompt for music generation and then give that prompt to the music generator. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good just based on a single image. So those are two things that background music and AI voices that we've built and are going to release over the next few weeks or months. Longer term, though, I think there's a lot of interesting potential in terms of assisting people in creating rooms. For instance, say I add a few things to the room. Now, when I go to the thing library, maybe AI can intelligently recommend other things I'd want in the room. It sees, oh, I'm making a kitchen. Maybe you want a sink. So I think there's things like that we could add that still give all the power to users to decide what they want to do, but just make those people's lives easier.
There are two other things that comes to mind, right? One is using AI as, to create those voxel, right? I mean, in a way, you can imagine there are tools like, for example, Meshy that allow you to create voxels. So I think it's not hard to think about something like that. It could be a tree. It could be anything. I mean, let's be honest. It could be anything.
Totally.
And the other is, of course, the ability to code.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that to be so important. And I don't know if in some way, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact that there are maybe less rooms that are, more rooms that are less interactive, right? Mm-hmm. That are more diorama, could also has to do with the fact that games are harder to make, that the logic, right?
Yeah.
So how are you experimenting with those? Have you considered them? They are me further away. I mean, how do you prioritize these various options that AI unlocks?
So those are both great ideas. And I think rooms is like the perfect environment for AI to thrive. So like, let's start with models, since you mentioned that first. If you've played with AI image generation or AI 3D model generation, especially with 3D model, the problem is artifacts, right? There's like weird things happening. Voxels, because they're it's either there or not. I would be willing to bet that there's fewer artifacts like that, unintended artifacts, and you can edit it so much more easily. You can just remove them. So I think absolutely it is possible. We now have over 10,000 3D voxel objects, and we chose, rather than to let anyone upload anything and be available to anyone, we actually have a human reviewing every single submission, naming it, tagging it. So we have really good training data for such a model. And we've done a little investigation talking with other startups that do model training. What we ultimately concluded was that at this time, the cost to train a model and generate new models is actually like not any cheaper than like paying someone in Vietnam to create models. So it, like, the math doesn't add up. And more important than that, even, there's diminishing return in 3D libraries. If you have 10,000 objects, or let's just say like you want a car, if you got 100 options for cars, the 101 first option isn't as valuable. And so we've not prioritized it for that reason. That said, absolutely there should be a day when I'm not constrained to the library and I can just say, I want a blue stool. And if there's not a blue stool, it'll create one or it'll color it blue. So that I think is super exciting, and would love to do it. But given that it's not what's stopping people today, we haven't prioritized it. Coding, we did an early prototype of allowing you to code using ChatGPT, but plugged into Rooms. And when it worked, it was magical. You could just say, make it spin, make it do this. But when it didn't work, which was frequently enough to make us not want to launch it, it was just frustrating. I am certain that we could overcome that if we, trained our own model. And the main issue was hallucinations and it coming up with the functions that didn't exist. I'm sure that we could fix that. Just a matter of prioritization. I think there will be a time where it makes sense. But for now, we just
because in a moment where we're saying that all developers are going to lose their job, because that's where we stand right now, thinking that, of course, within restriction, it should be possible to, let's say, add those. Again, not allow. It's always a matter of balancing complexity with depth, right? So how much you want to make this complex in order to create how much in this room, right? So if the capability go instead of from 1 to 10, from 1 to 5, but then balancing that. But again, I think that you guys have probably very clear idea based on what people are creating, much better than me rambling about everything that could be done with AI.
Well, and one nice thing is that users already can and do utilize AI for coding. A lot of users have told us that they either just asked their AI assistant of choice, or they copied in the code from an existing thing, because you can view the source of anything, and said, "Can you change this to do this or that?" So people, just to say, people can already utilize this without us having to integrate it on our platform today.
So you mentioned indeed that you had experience and you work at Google, at Meta, at Vine. So I'm curious, through this journey of building this platform as it is today, right? What are the lessons that you have learned, that you have brought into Rooms, and what maybe have you left away?
Yeah. I like the way you frame the question, because I think that second bucket might be a larger bucket, candidly, than the first.
Let's go through it.
I'd say like the biggest thing that I took away from the big companies, or in particular Google, was this focus on the user. So Google had early on established these 10 things we know to be true, and the first one was focus on the user and all else will follow. And I very much believe in that. If you do right by the user, good things will happen. Right, like Google famously wanted to minimize how much time people spent on the search results page, whereas most of the internet was trying to maximize the amount of time people were spending on pages, and it worked out at least for a while for them. So that's probably the biggest thing I drew from those experiences. That, and also finding my amazing co-founders, who are among the best engineers I've ever worked with, and in a world where engineering talent is or top engineering talent is scarce, it's helpful to work to be exposed to some of those people at larger companies. In terms of what I didn't take, big tech companies are victims of their own success, and a metaphor I sometimes think about is it's almost like they are gigantic cruise ships, right? and in a sea where like the tide is changing, and so they want to change course, and they're like, oh, tell the captain to change course, and it's like relayed through a bunch of people, and then like someone turns a wheel, and then it starts to turn. It's very slow. Versus a startup, we're in like a speedboat or a jet ski, so we can maneuver much more quickly. We also have higher risk tolerance. Google and Facebook, they have much more to lose than to gain at this point, and they act accordingly. Anything I worked on, and this only became like more true over time as I worked there, and I'm sure it's even more true today, needed to go through a number of reviews and processes, and all well intended, but with the net effect of like beating down any original unique idea into something that had been done before, because that then you could establish that it was safe and provable or whatever else. With rooms, we actually initially in the company, I think I incorrectly followed a lot of models that I had become so accustomed to. But after about a year of that not working, we just said, you know what? The heck with it. We're just going to like do what we think is right and not overthink it and not try to justify it in a presentation and with numbers. If we want to build joysticks so people can play games in rooms, like we're just going to do it. And the more we've sort of followed that instinct and and avoided the like analyzing something to death, the better things have been. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's just like letting the human personality and quirks and all that like come out.
So, but then, how would you frame this as an advice to other founders that are trying to build products? Is that follow your heart?
I guess that's one way to put it. Follow your heart. I think. I mean, one very, very practical piece of advice is when I started things, I hired 8 engineers, and they were fantastic engineers, fantastic human beings. But anytime you hire 8 smart people, they're going to have a lot of reasonable questions and concerns. And as the CEO, I want to think about these concerns and considerations, but the more you do that, the more you like crowdsource any idea, the less opinionated it becomes. So I guess the advice to founders is not just to follow your heart, but to follow your gut, and think of that as your unique advantage relative to larger companies where they can't follow their gut, either because the gut is spread across so many people that it's like not really a gut anymore, or
a lot
because
of people have been gutted.
Yes, exactly. They've been gutted. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest advice, is just to like do things that don't even necessarily make sense on paper, but that feel right inside.
So that's a very interesting point. And I want to maybe ask a follow-up on this, and it's open-ended, like anything else. So when you mention like follow your gut and try to look at things that not necessarily make sense in the first place, but you feel they are right, are there other things that you would say you would recommend founders that are building products to follow?
I think another piece of advice is to allow yourself to dream the best case scenario. Like often I would suggest something, and you know, one of my teammates would say, well, that's so unlikely to happen. But I would think, well, the only way we're going to have a chance of it happening is if we can like picture it, right? If we just assume it's not going to happen ever, then we're going to give up before we even tried. So even though it sounds outrageous to say, I think rooms could be as big as Roblox someday, and bigger. And I really do believe that, and I have to believe that in order for me to like make the right investments for it to become possible for us to become that big, if that makes any sense.
So I think this is a perfect way to kind of like end this, because you brought in Roblox, right? And in a way, the analogy is clear, right? There is this world, these places that can be created by people, and there are people that spend time in it. And I want to take aside for a second this aspect of the creation side, but people that experience it, that play it, that maybe just participate in the story, right? We are right now creating a world where creating it's as easy as ever, right? Supported by great tools, great experience, by AI as well. So I wonder, like, when like the limitation for content, it's basically gone, right? For creating content, it's basically gone. Anybody can create content. So what do you think is the future of content consumption? Where will people gravitate towards in a world where content is infinite?
I mean, so I think you're right. I think we're for all intents and purposes already there. There's near infinite content on TikTok, clearly, and that on the internet. It's an interesting question because I think there's one philosophy which is, well, algorithms and AI will find all the good stuff and bring it to you, and that's the solution. It'll be served to you in a way that like the computer deems best. But on the other hand, I feel like similar to us as society overdosing on photos, I feel like we've also like, at least speaking personally, I've had enough of like algorithms telling me what I want to see. A lot of times I just want to like control what I see a little bit more overtly. So with that in mind, I predict that we're going to see more presence of human curators in some shape or form, be it like friends or human beings that work for companies. In rooms, we rely heavily on human curation. We have a person whose primary job is just to like feature the very best rooms. And while we also have some basic algorithmic stuff that exposes the best stuff, I think there's just nothing that substitutes, or at least nothing yet, that substitutes like a human eye with good taste. And to the other part of your question, in the future where creation is effortless, I think that the main thing that matters then is taste. And already that's true for some portion of people who have the resources to commission any art that they want. But I think that will just become more important than ever. And it'll become less about learning the rote skills needed to do whatever the thing is, and more about the person's judgment of whether the thing is good or not, and making it, and their decisions that lead them to whatever creation.
Jason, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to hear about Rooms, and looking forward to everything that's about to come.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, remember to leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlights on the greatest founders and makers, pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. Also, make sure to check out the show page xraispotlight.com, where you can find more conversation like this one. Till next time.